Henry VIII is remembered for 6 wives, 2 of them executed, and a king who changed the course of English history. But behind the larger-than-life legend was a ruler whose ambition, pride, and desperation transformed a nation forever. This is a quick run-through of Henry VIII. When Henry Tudor was born in 1491, no one expected him to become king. His older brother Arthur was destined for the throne, while Henry received the education expected of a younger son. He studied languages, theology, music, and sport. Athletic, intelligent, and charismatic, the young prince impressed almost everyone who met him. Everything changed in 1502. Arthur died suddenly at just 15 years old, making Henry the new heir to the English throne. 7 years later, in 1509, Henry became King of England at only 17. Tall, handsome, and enormously popular, he seemed to embody the ideal Renaissance prince. He loved hunting, jousting, dancing, and music, even composing songs himself. Foreign ambassadors praised his appearance and charm, while many believed England had entered a golden age. Henry wasn't content to be admired only at home. Like many Renaissance kings, he dreamed of winning glory on the battlefields of Europe. Soon after becoming king, he launched campaigns against France, hoping to revive England's medieval claims to French territory. In 1513, English forces captured the towns of Terouanne and Tournai. Although these victories were relatively modest, they were celebrated as great triumphs back in England. During the same campaign, King James IV of Scotland invaded England in support of France. While Henry was fighting abroad, an English army defeated the Scots at the Battle of Flodden, where James himself was killed. Henry's ambitions, however, often exceeded England's resources. Decades of costly wars against both France and Scotland drained the royal treasury and brought few lasting gains. Yet they also won Henry international prestige. In 1520, he met King Francis I of France at the spectacular Field of the Cloth of Gold, where the two monarchs staged a dazzling display of wealth and power. Although little lasting diplomacy emerged, the event perfectly captured Henry's determination to stand among Europe's greatest rulers. But glory on the battlefield was becoming less important than something far closer to home: securing the Tudor succession. Soon after his coronation, Henry married Catherine of Aragon. The marriage wasn't unusual. Catherine had originally been married to Henry's late brother Arthur, but after papal approval declared that marriage had never been consummated, she became Henry's queen. For many years the marriage appeared happy, but there was one devastating problem. The couple struggled to produce a surviving male heir. Although Catherine became pregnant several times, only one child lived beyond infancy, a daughter named Mary. In Tudor England, this was far more than a personal tragedy. The Wars of the Roses were still a recent memory, and Henry feared that without a legitimate son, England could once again descend into civil war after his death. At first, Henry hoped another pregnancy would solve the problem. Instead, the years passed. As Catherine grew older, the chances of producing an heir faded. Henry became convinced that God was punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. He pointed to passages in the Bible that he believed proved the marriage had been cursed from the beginning. He asked Pope Clement VII to annul the marriage. The Pope refused, partly because the legal case was complicated, but mainly because Catherine's nephew was the immensely powerful Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, whose armies had recently occupied Rome itself. The Pope simply couldn't afford to anger him. Henry refused to accept no for an answer. If the Pope wouldn't end his marriage, he would remove the Pope's authority altogether. In one of the most significant political decisions in English history, Henry broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. His reasons were deeply personal, but the consequences reached far beyond his marriage, allowing the English crown to take control of the church in England and setting in motion religious changes that continued long after Henry's death. In 1534, Parliament passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring Henry, not the Pope, to be the supreme head of the Church of England. The English Reformation had begun. The break with Rome wasn't simply about Henry's marriage. It dramatically increased royal power. Between 1536 and 1541, Henry's government dissolved hundreds of monasteries across England and Wales. Their lands and immense wealth passed to the crown, transforming the country's religious, economic, and political landscape. Supporters saw it as reform. Critics saw it as the destruction of centuries of religious life. Henry's break with Rome also had major consequences beyond England. At the beginning of his reign, English authority in Ireland extended mainly around Dublin, in an area known as the Pale, while much of the island remained under powerful Gaelic and Anglo-Irish lords. As many Irish leaders remained loyal to the Pope, Henry strengthened English control by declaring himself King of Ireland in 1541, replacing the earlier title of Lord of Ireland. Although this did not immediately bring the whole island under English rule, it marked the beginning of a new phase of Tudor expansion that would shape Irish history for centuries. Although England's religious changes would continue for generations, Henry's immediate goal was surprisingly personal. He wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. Anne was intelligent, ambitious, and unlike many women at court, she refused to become Henry's mistress. If Henry wanted her, he would have to marry her. And so he did. In 1533, Anne became queen. Later that year, she gave birth not to the long-awaited prince, but to another daughter. The child was Elizabeth. Henry saw another disappointment. History would remember her as one of England's greatest queens. Anne suffered further pregnancies that ended in miscarriage, including one believed to have been a boy. Henry's patience disappeared. In 1536, Anne was arrested and accused of adultery, incest, and treason. Most historians believe the charges were fabricated to remove her from power. After a brief trial, she was found guilty. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed inside the Tower of London by a specially hired French swordsman. Remarkably, Henry became engaged to Jane Seymour almost immediately. Within days of Anne's execution, they were married. Jane finally achieved what Catherine and Anne could not. In October 1537, she gave birth to Prince Edward. At last, Henry had the male heir he had desired for decades. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Jane died less than 2 weeks after giving birth, probably from complications following childbirth. Henry was devastated. His fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, married Henry in 1540 as part of a political alliance arranged after Hans Holbein painted her portrait. The marriage quickly proved unsuccessful and was annulled after just 6 months. Anne remained in England with generous estates and became known as the king's beloved sister, ultimately outliving Henry and all of his other wives. Next came Catherine Howard. Young, lively, and probably still a teenager, she brought new energy to Henry's increasingly unhealthy court. By now, Henry was no longer the athletic prince of his youth. A serious jousting accident in 1536 had left him with chronic leg ulcers, and his health steadily declined. When evidence emerged that Catherine had engaged in relationships before her marriage and was later accused of conducting an affair while queen, she was convicted of treason. She was executed at the Tower of London in 1542. His sixth and final wife was Catherine Parr. Unlike her predecessors, Catherine was highly educated, politically skilled, and cautious. She acted as nurse during Henry's declining health and helped reconcile him with both Mary and Elizabeth, who had previously been declared illegitimate. That decision would prove remarkably important, because after Henry's death, all 3 of his surviving children would eventually wear the English crown. Edward VI ruled first. After his early death, Mary I became queen, and finally came Elizabeth I, whose reign would become known as England's Golden Age. Henry himself died on 28 January 1547 at the age of 55. He had ruled England for nearly 38 years. By the end of his reign, he had executed thousands under various charges, dissolved hundreds of monasteries, dramatically increased royal power, permanently altered England's relationship with religion, reshaped English rule in Ireland, and left England deeply involved in the rivalries that defined 16th century Europe. Today, Henry VIII remains one of history's most recognizable monarchs. His 6 marriages dominate popular culture, but his greatest legacy was the transformation of England itself. The young Renaissance prince who dreamed of glory became the monarch who reshaped a kingdom, politically, religiously, and dynastically. He began his reign full of promise. He ended it feared by many, admired by some, condemned by others, and impossible to ignore. Nearly 5 centuries later, the legend of Henry VIII still stands at the heart of English history. If you enjoyed this quick run-through, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time as we explore another moment or individual that changed history.